It all merges now. The images, some from dreams, and also the many memories from childhood. And the memory of that day, it still glows. And that gentle but persistent therapist, she told me later that she was utterly surprised by the words that finally came out of her mouth, as though those words spoke themselves.
No, Elaine, we think about things deeply, and things touch us deeply. We feel things deeply. We're maybe highly sensitive.
I loved the water, but I was afraid to put my face under.
You cried?
Yeah, I did.
What else do you think about?
Well, I think about all the cruelty in the world, the injustice, the greed. I worry about the planet, and I think about whether I'm raising my son right, and I think about whether I'm doing the right thing with my life. It's too much noise, rushing, maneuvering. But to fight global warming, I just wanted a crowd. Things can hurt, but I also feel love and joy more intensely. Beauty, music, art. Most of all, just being in nature, it all moves me so deeply. Those memories, images, dreams, they persisted for 2 years, almost asking something of me, until I sensed that there might be some voices here, others like mine, that needed to be heard.
Me and my helmet.
Well, I suppose you need to know a little bit more about me, and I am a research psychologist. I have been a university professor in the past, a published novelist, and more than anything else, I'm a highly sensitive person.
I spent most of my life thinking that how I was a problem for people.
I think I went into clinical psychology because I didn't know what was the matter with me.
Right.
And I hear that so many times from people.
Well, I knew something was up when my family was looking at me somewhat strangely. Something about that moment validated a lot of my having felt alone in a world where I felt misperceived and misunderstood.
In 1991, Dr. Elaine Aron made a major breakthrough when she identified the trait of high sensitivity, a subject that I find deeply fascinating. High sensitivity is not a disorder or a condition. It is an innate temperament trait and is found in the same numbers in both men and women. There is now solid research on the subject, from brain studies to genetic analysis. The purpose of this film is to shine light on the trait of high sensitivity. I think you will find it important to your life. Maybe yourself, or your spouse, or your child are highly sensitive. It's not just about the 20%, it's about all of us. This is Sensitive, the Untold Story.
I always knew that there was something different about me, but I didn't know what it was. Certainly my parents had no clue about my sensitivity. I was forced into a lot of situations that were really bad for me. I couldn't understand why I couldn't learn to swim. Every year I had to take swimming lessons, and every year everyone in the class learned to swim except me. It was because I was very sensitive to the water in my face and in my ears, and I was afraid to put my head under because, gee, I'd been told a million times, don't drown, don't go too near the water, you might fall in and drown, and all of a sudden I'm supposed to put my head in it. So that's the kind of conundrums that sensitive children get into because they're being asked by their parents to do things that are hard for them but easy for other kids. And then the parents go into this place of, there's something wrong with my kid.
Like many sensitive children, Elaine excelled in school and went on to earn her master's degree and then her doctorate in psychology. So as both a psychologist and a sensitive person, she was listening carefully when that counselor told her she might be highly sensitive.
That's when I decided to do these interviews. I put up posters and said, are you highly sensitive or introverted? Because at the time I thought maybe this is introversion. Another source of information about this came to me through the clinical world and through Carl Jung, who studied introversion. I thought maybe it was the same thing. So I did these interviews, and I quickly discovered, for one thing, that 30% of these people were extroverts. So I wasn't studying introversion. I was studying something else.
While Elaine was focusing her research sensitivity in adults, others were researching it in animals and children. Unbeknownst to each other, they were all on the same track. A revolution was in the making.
I began to look at other places where temperament was studied, with infants and animals. The biologists were saying that this trait persisted in humans and over 100 other species in about 20% of individuals in each species, because it has survival advantages in situations where paying attention is valuable. 20% of individuals in all these species couldn't possibly represent a disorder or simply a disadvantage for survival.
And then Elaine Aron, of course, not working with children, working with adults, came to the notion of the sensitive person. And the sensitive person had many of the characteristics that my work in child development pointed out would make a person more sensitive, being highly, in the infant and toddler case, highly negative emotional and difficult temperament, i.e. appearing to have a highly sensitive nervous system.
Well, would you say you cry easily?
Of course, a variety of theories about the details are springing up, waiting for more scientific research.
Our observation, our theory and belief about these highly reactive, biologically susceptible children is that susceptibility grows out of a combination of genetic and environmental influences. We believe, for a variety of reasons that are grounded in solid science now, that children, even in the womb, even in prenatal life, are sensing things about the environment in which they're going to be born and are adjusting, moving up and down their responsivity to various characteristics of the environment based on that anticipation.
Adults, children, animals. These allow us to see sensitivity from 3 different perspectives.
Dr. Maya Bram-Dubé from Bern University in Switzerland is currently conducting research on highly sensitive dogs.
So this topic is very important to me. It's always been important to me because I've always been drawn to animals. I've always felt very close to them, and the sensitivity, of course, because I can empathize with them because I went through it myself. And I see in my behavior practice how often animals are not understood in their needs, and they're suffering because of that. And they often don't have a choice but to suffer or to show it as a behavior problem, so that they need more understanding of the environment to help cope. And if ideally, of course, if you could catch that before they develop problems and you could adapt your interactions, your environment to the animal, you might be able to prevent some problems from happening. And also what's very important to me and what I like about Elaine Aron's work is that it's not defined as something wrong or a pathology or a sickness or an illness or a disease or a syndrome. It's part of a personality that's just a bit different, and it has its positive sides as well, not just its negative sides.
And what Elaine recognized early on is that this is a trait that has both ups and downs. And she also recognized that the core of it was not being upset by things, but noticing things more intensely.
I'm pleased about these results. They're so varied, and people find that quite amazing.
The trait was being studied extensively in rhesus monkeys by Dr. Stephen Suomi at the National Institutes of Health in Maryland, who is world famous for his research.
We can see some real similarities between the individual humans that Elaine Aron calls sensitive, highly sensitive, and the monkeys, those individual monkeys that we call uptight, in that they are both very responsive to minor changes in their environment. They pick up things in their environment that other monkeys and other people largely miss or ignore. And we think that this is in part due to some underlying differences in their genetic makeup.
We who study sensitivity eventually converge, even though working in different contexts, and sometimes using different terms. My specialty has always been the study of the process in adults. One advantage of studying adults is that you cannot study the process without brain scans or using questionnaires.
Adding the task of explaining the trait to the public, which seemed impatient to hear more about the research, Elaine wrote The Highly Sensitive Person, an international bestseller which has been translated into 18 languages. Something of a movement has grown up around those who call themselves, quote, HSPs, with all the intended discussion of it on the internet, much of it useful and some of it way out there. To help clarify what she sees as the essence of the trait, in 2012 in her book for professionals, she summarized the trait as having 4 key characteristics using the acronym DOES. This stands for depth of processing, overstimulation, strong emotions and empathy, and sensitivity to subtleties.
HSPs showed more activation than the non-HSPs.
Of the 4 characteristics, this strategy of processing or reflecting on information more deeply or elaborately is most basic. It's behind all the sensitive behaviors one sees in animals and children. Yet deep processing cannot in itself be actually seen.
I observed both my son and my nephew on their first day of preschool, standing at the back of the room. I knew they weren't afraid, they were watching, because they'd never seen so many children and toys in one place. But both times the teachers walked up to them and said, "Oh, are you afraid? Are you shy?" And so those labels kind of fell onto them. So labels of fearfulness and all these difficulties are applied to sensitive people even when they don't apply.
If you identify kids that show a particular behavior, and the behavior might be very quiet, you might easily come to think that this is a shy kid and make certain assumptions about what that means. You might think the kid isn't interested, or you might assume the kid is not bright enough to pick up what's going on. But those could all be wrong, right? It might just be that this is a highly sensitive kid, and this is a kid who observes quietly and takes things in rather than being very behaviorally outgoing and easily readable.
Hi, sweetie. How are you doing? Good. You want to play with her a little bit?
I was never understood when I was a child at home. Nobody listened to me, what I had to say, and cared about how I felt. It was not important. I was crazy, and I was too sensitive, and I was taking things too deeply, and stopped crying, and just constantly pushed away. So I was by myself, and I was always called the shy person. I was the introvert. I would always sit back and I would watch.
Shyness is the fear of social evaluation. And so it's often been mixed up with sensitivity because lots of sensitive people can become shy. Why? Because they're a minority, and therefore people often treat them a little differently because maybe they're overstimulated when they show up at a party and they don't have anything to say.
So when a child is introverted or shy or somewhat what we call slow to warm up, all of those things can be misinterpreted as being something autistic or on the autistic scale or even Asperger-ish, when indeed there's nothing going on here around Asperger's or autism. There's been a misdiagnosis and the child is simply highly sensitive.
Of course, we do not want to imply that every case of shyness, or what's called social phobia, or every case of autism in which you also see a problem with overstimulation, or a case of any other disorder, is actually always a highly sensitive individual who was misdiagnosed and is really just highly sensitive. But there's another error we can make. Someone could think that a symptom is entirely due to high sensitivity when it really is a sign of a real disorder. And the third possibility is that a person is highly sensitive and has a disorder too. Gaining more clarity about this trait is what makes the research so important.
And parents who are not sure can always get an evaluation. But you don't get an evaluation from someone who only sees autism spectrum disorder and knows nothing about temperament, just as you wouldn't want to take the child to someone who only knew about temperament and couldn't recognize Asperger's.
Elaine feels none of her results would have reached the light of day without her husband, Art Aron, a well-known researcher of love as well as of sensitivity, perhaps best known for his 36 questions from one of his studies that then went viral as a method to fall in love. At Stony Brook University, he and Elaine, along with a number of collaborators, used brain imaging while subjects did a task to uncover depth of processing.
We've got a lot of research underway at the moment. We've got a couple new fMRI studies, neuroimaging studies, brain imaging studies we're conducting.
These findings show that highly sensitive individuals are not pausing in novel situations because they're shy or they're scared or they're putting on the brakes to engaging in a situation. In fact, what they're doing is they're engaging systems of their brain that are associated with awareness, depth of processing, integration of the other person in the self, emotional meaning making, so that then they can respond to their needs appropriately.
So, so this is basically a rendering of this particular individual's features based on the skull.
There you go.
Bianca Acevedo also did a careful inspection of the amygdala, a part of the brain that activates when a person experiences fear and anxiety. And it was not activated in the highly sensitive during task when it might have been, clarifying that these people are not by nature socially anxious or shy. A result found in other studies too. Meanwhile, people of all walks of life are discovering what the trait is really all about.
I play team handball, and it's a very fast sport where everything moves very quickly. If you're really sensitive, you don't really need to see everything because you're sensitive and you can feel what is happening around you, and you can really be aware and anticipate where the others are without really seeing them.
Not all depth of processing is conscious, making it much like intuition. That is, we can know something without knowing how we know it.
You can't learn that just by visualizing or doing mental exercises. You're born with that. And I find that as a very special gift.
Naturally, if you're processing everything in the environment more deeply, more thoroughly, you are more easily overstimulated.
Yeah! Baby, did you see that touchdown?
Yep.
Ah, we got the win. Baby, what's wrong? That was a great game.
I didn't say I didn't enjoy it. I wanted to get home.
Well, everybody was excited. We got the win.
Yeah, that's great. It's just, it was so noisy.
Oh, not the noise thing again. I mean, it bothers you when I jingle my keys in front of you.
I've already apologized for that.
Overstimulation is what others close to the highly sensitive may notice most, and what might really frustrate or confuse them.
Basically, everything about life is overwhelming. And like even something as simple as walking on the street outside can be like, oh, there's people driving by and they're looking at me right now, and you're very aware of things, super aware of things.
We reach a threshold that is much lower. We see things, we feel things, we perceive things, we process things deeper it's a balancing act to be able to be out in the world.
The problem is always finding the right balance between how much time to be out in the world and how much to pull back for a while. Sensitive people have a lot they want to offer. They're curious, often highly creative, but they do need their downtime. Once they understand this, they begin to plan for it.
Me and my helmet, such an unconventional kid, all intense.
Now that I've met Alanis Morissette, I find her a perfect example. She's been writing songs since she was 9 years old, and as she grew as a songwriter, the overstimulation grew. As one example, her album Jagged Little Pill sold 30 million copies worldwide, leading to outright adulation.
On one hand, my traits and these qualities were seen as really positive and a boon, and something that people were frothing at the mouth to exploit. And then in the same breath, it was something that was sort of the bane of my existence and a challenge for people to deal with.
That's exactly the way I describe like the package deal, that people want the positive side of the sensitivity and then they want you to get rid of the negative side, and you can't get rid of it.
And Lord knows I tried. I thought, okay, so you don't like the feeling part, the intense feelings that I have. Okay, I'll be the needless robot that you want me to be. But of course, there was a great misperception of my approach to life as being too high maintenance and too emotional and a lot of too much, too intense. And so I spent most of my life thinking that how I was a problem for people, yet at the same time I was getting the message that what it was that I was coming to specifically because of my trait, they wanted that. They wanted the outcome and the fruit of my trait, but they didn't want my trait. So it was an interesting combination of being loved for it and being rejected for it.
Of what you do is very intense, and we know a lot of stars burn out in terrible ways.
How am I not dead? My lifestyle was not very conducive to care for the HSP for a really long time. And so I would just go through moments of having meltdowns and breakdowns, and I would keep them private because I didn't want to be a bother. But that was my way of doing it. I'd go a month or two really hard, and then I would crash. And there were times where I didn't know, I didn't have the maturity or the experience enough to create a day or two after a show or after a big event. Oftentimes I would just careen right into the next event or the next interview or the next show or the next video. And it was hard on my body. I developed a really fiery version of work addiction that I've been in recovery for a while. And in being in recovery for work addiction, I have found myself really caring for this highly sensitive part of me.
Alanis wrote that I would be good as a reflection of her being a highly sensitive person.
That I would be good even if I did nothing.
I wrote that I would be good in my closet because I was so overwhelmed. My home became this Grand Central Station, and I remember there having been 10 people downstairs. And so I hid in my closet, of all places, and I remember lighting a candle on the floor in my closet and writing that I would be good as a prayer, like a meditation that I could listen to that would soothe me in times of overstimulation and maxing out and not having had enough time alone or breaks. And it was just like a gentle balm.
Overstimulation is a serious disadvantage of the trait, true. But Alanis told us about the emotional responsiveness and empathy she can feel with her highly sensitive audience that makes her feel so authentic as a performer.
That I would be good even if I did nothing.
So there were some songs that even when I would perform them on stage around the planet when we would tour, immediately the first few chords would play and I would just feel this huge relief wash over me. And I could just see the sweet HSP faces. You know, a lot of the HSPs are right up front. And so there's a lot of emotional crying and fervor and passion. And we would just be mirroring each other. You know, I would be a lot of physical catharsis on stage, and then I would see the effect of it in the people's faces in the audience. So it was really gratifying in that way.
That I would be good if I lost my head and my youth.
If you think being emotional means being irrational, actually, the latest thinking is that emotions generally lead to better thinking, because we only think thoroughly about something we care about.
Dr. Robert Levinson at the University of California, Berkeley, is well known for his research on emotion.
One of the things, if you study emotion, that you're struck by is just how different people are in the size of the emotions they have and the frequency at which they become emotional.
One of the things that highly sensitive people report is that they cry easily. Now, other people also cry easily, but it seems to be in general more true of highly sensitive. Why would that be? Well, if you're processing information more thoroughly, then the same thing that might not quite make someone else cry because they're not quite attending to it in as much detail is going to make the highly sensitive person cry.
These findings also show that highly sensitive people show greater activation in areas that are associated with empathy. So in at least 20 or 30 studies of empathy, people showed activation in certain areas that highly sensitive people are also engaging to a greater degree in response to their partners and to strangers' emotions.
When I walk into a room, I know what everyone is feeling. I know if someone's had a bad day. I know if someone's arguing with their wife. It can be overwhelming, and at a period of time, I couldn't leave my house at all when I lived in Los Angeles because I'd walk out my door and feel the feelings of 8 million people. And so I'd run back into my house. But I really, really love that I notice things that other people don't notice. It helps me be an antenna for the world. Through my writing, I know what's going on and what people need to hear, and then I can write about it. So I've turned it sort of from a curse and a bad trait into something that is helpful to myself and to others.
Empathy means we can understand what the other person is feeling and be supportive. We can also use empathy to help ourselves, maybe to develop our professional reputation by sensing, for example, what our clients or students or patients need, even before they do.
Extensive brain imaging conducted by Yaja Jagelowitz during her doctoral studies at Stony Brook University and published in Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience show that the areas of the brain for understanding subtle cues are more active in sensitive than non-sensitive persons.
What this study means is that highly sensitive people notice more about the world they live in. But the key thing is not just that they notice more. They take what they notice and they combine it with information that they've noticed all their life. So because they've noticed more all their life, and because they're able to combine all that information, they often come up with unique new ideas.
Combining ideas in novel ways is the essence of creativity. Even experiences while young, such as with different animals, may lead later to creative insights about all animals and their temperaments. Or combining novel ideas might bring about new research breakthroughs, revolutionary art, or world-changing insights. We are not saying that all creative people are highly sensitive, but surely the qualities we see in them do contribute substantially to creativity. Another striking finding was that there was more activity for sensitive people in the insula, part of the brain often called the seat of consciousness. because it brings together all of our inner and outer experiences.
Highly sensitive individuals, they're engaging the insula to a greater extent because in some ways it's like they're more aware. And this is in line with a lot of the other research and theory on sensory processing sensitivity, suggesting that highly sensitive people are more aware of others, they're more aware of the subtleties in their environment.
These 4 qualities we just explored, depth of processing, being easily overstimulated, being more emotionally responsive, and sensing the subtle in the environment, they add up to highly sensitive people, especially in childhood, being more affected by everything that happens to them. Not just bad things, but good things too.
And these 3 lines of research, mine and Jay Belsky and Michael Plewis and Tom Boyce and Bruce Ellis, we've all converged on the same idea of this wonderful trait that's underneath the hood that can't be seen easily. So it's not been described that much, by the general public. You can't look at someone and say, oh, that person's sensitive and that person's not. Now people can begin to understand a child or a parent or a friend or a spouse who's highly sensitive, but they didn't understand it first. Jay Belsky and Michael Plewis came up with this phrase, differential susceptibility.
Differential susceptibility is a fairly new concept that refers to individual differences in how we respond to the environments that we are exposed to. Susceptibility is a fancy word for sensitivity, so basically it refers to the notion that some people are more sensitive to experiences they make than other people. Environmental sensitivity is one of the most fundamental traits found in humans, but in many species. And it's so fundamental that we don't even think much about it. But most of the concepts we look at that focus on individual differences contain the notion that some people are more affected by what they experience than others. Hence, my conclusion of proposition is that people differ fundamentally in how they perceive and process environmental features, with some being generally more and some being generally less sensitive. Having a high degree of sensitivity has advantages and has disadvantages.
Highly sensitive persons process all experience more deeply. So when we have unsupported childhoods that are negative, when we didn't get the responses from the parents when we were very young, when we didn't believe they would come when we cried, when our needs weren't taken care of, that simply laid the foundation for later life, feeling more fearful, being afraid to venture out and try new things. For those individuals on the other side of it who had supported childhoods, where the parents provided the nurturing, provided the love, provided the attention that people need, they had a strong base to build on. So when they ventured out into life, they felt more free, more confident, and when they faced a setback, they were more easily able to bounce back from it.
So if someone is very highly sensitive and is exposed to very adverse environments, then that person is more likely to develop depression because that person is more affected by that particular experience. But the positive aspect is that if they experience support from their environment, that could be psychological therapy, that could be social support, they are more likely to benefit from that support.
So now my counsel is, what you should tell people, pediatricians, counselors, neonatologists, that some kids have more difficult temperaments, but they are much more malleable clay in your hands. They are going to thrive and flourish if you care for them well, more so than others. But they are going to suffer and go down if you care for them poorly. So you are much more, it seems, of the conductor of this orchestra in those cases than in other cases. But will that get through? Will people embrace this? Time will tell.
We think deeply, feel things deeply.
Another school year, and yet another teacher calling us to tell us there's something wrong with our son. You gotta stop overprotecting him, Pam. I won't have it.
But I'm not overprotecting him. He's only 7 years old.
teacher just wants us to go down there and discuss a couple things with us.
If Hank is being bullied, he needs to stand up for himself.
Bill, she never said anything about him being bullied.
Well, then what's the problem this time?
I'd say that all the adult highly sensitive people I know, most of them will say their parents didn't understand them, and then they're spending a lot of time sorting that out.
Well, I knew something was up when my family was looking at me somewhat strangely. And I remember probably about 10 years ago, my father and I were sitting down. I was hosting a show in Canada, and he was having a moment, and I was crying about something intense for me, which he'd gotten used to, I suppose, at that point. He said to me, he said, "Alanis, I'm so sorry. We just never really knew what to do with you. We were at a loss." Something about that moment and his authentic expression of that to me, it validated a lot of my having felt alone in a world where I felt misperceived and misunderstood. And I knew that there were a handful of things that if they were taken into consideration, that I would be my best self really consistently. And equally, if I were to be in environments where I was shamed for what I now see as talents and a gorgeous trait, frankly. Had I been in environments where it had been supported, it would have been a lot easier for me, and I wouldn't have felt so shame-ridden.
That I would be good.
Alanis now enjoys advocating for causes she has found to be of central importance. One is attachment parenting. Also, because, like her son is highly sensitive, she is deeply interested in parenting sensitive children. Alanis told me that she and her husband Sola know that one key to parenting their son ever is, in Alanis's words, honoring his every feeling and letting him feel it through. Another is preventing his becoming overstimulated. If Alanis and Ever both need downtime, then Sola, not having the trait himself, can readily take over. Teamwork. Overstimulation can lead to all kinds of problems in children, irritation and even tantrums.
I would throw these tantrums as a kid where I would just be so overwhelmed, and there were points where I would be on the ground crying, freaking out all the time.
There's a lot of parents out there that would be really embarrassed by that behavior, where their child is fine 1 minute, and the next minute they're freaking out on the ground, crying, screaming. So instead of responding to the fact that, oh, she's just overwhelmed, this is too much, there's too much information coming in, there's too much sight, there's too much sound, there's too much texture, there's just too much stimulation, they see their child is all of a sudden becoming bad. They discipline them, they're embarrassed, they might get a spanking, all unnecessarily if they knew that their child was a highly sensitive person.
Of course, it's always true that parents should set limits with any child, but we all learn better when in our optimal state of arousal, neither under or overstimulated. A stern message may help to get a less sensitive child's attention, but it can so overstimulate sensitive children that they cannot process the moral lesson behind the correction. Sometimes you have to wait until later to discuss what happened and what they should do next time. Often, that's all it takes.
What's interesting is that the percentage of men and women who are highly sensitive are equal. But because in most cultures, men aren't supposed to show their emotions, it's really hard for sensitive boys.
I had a father who was hardcore military, and it was like, I remember when I was six years old, And I had a little fight in the neighborhood, and he locked me out of the house and said, "You're not coming back in this house until you kick his ass." So, you know, I knew that I had to stand up and struggle and fight and be a man and not really show like a softer side. And so I think in his eyes, he had to toughen me up.
Most sensitive males especially have a really hard time growing up because they don't fit in with the so-called boy code culture. And a lot of times when a boy expresses in another with a group of other boys, "Oh, I'm afraid of something," or "I'm scared," or "I'm sad," or "I'm anxious," they get ostracized and humiliated.
I know what the problem is, woman, whether you do or not. In this world, a man has to be strong. Now, he needs to defend himself when he handles himself with other boys. He needs to get outdoors, play some sports.
But he does want to play sports. He's interested in track.
Track? Great. So he can learn how to run away.
When a parent is not highly sensitive and does not realize that the child is highly sensitive, he will feel that maybe I have to push him more. And when he pushes the child more, the sensitive child will feel, "Oh, I'm not accepted like I am. He doesn't like me if I need to have some more time." And like that, he will become more insecure in his relationship to the father, and he will maybe be even less daring than he would otherwise be.
My father couldn't talk about it, my mother couldn't talk about it, we couldn't talk about it, and they couldn't frame it in a way that would have been beneficial for me in order for me to understand myself, understand my emotions, and not reacting with the anger instead. Because when you're frustrated and you can't talk about things, you get angry. That's how I was raised.
He needs to get in there and tackle things. Football, basketball.
Bill. Bill. This isn't you. This isn't you. Don't you remember how loving you were to him when he was a baby? Now he just fears you. Always shouting and hollering all the time.
For one thing, just think of the cost of messing up a sensitive child because of they're going to have this depression, anxiety, and various problems their whole lives, versus getting it right and having them being some of the most productive, thoughtful members of society. And what do we need in society? People who think deeply, have strong emotional responses at the same time. So we say a good heart, a deep mind, sensitive to subtlety so they notice what's going on. We need more of those people everywhere.
One of my favorite stories of successful parenting of a sensitive child is that of social psychologist Steve Wright, a friend and colleague from Vancouver, Canada, a father who is definitely not highly sensitive himself.
My older daughter is not a highly sensitive person, and so for 2 years I'd been dealing with this bubbling baby who just wanted to go out and be everywhere. And then Risa showed up and things were very different. I wondered what we were doing wrong. I wondered why she wasn't happy. I wondered why she was scared of people, or at least I thought she was scared of people. So yeah, it was difficult in the sense of feeling like we were, you know, that she was sad too much, or that she was worried too much, or that she wasn't happy about the things that we were doing, or that I was doing things that were making her feel unsafe or feel sad or scared or whatever.
When I was younger, it was really hard for me to make friends, and because I wouldn't want to be the first person to go and talk to someone. So if the other person was shy or more reserved, I wouldn't go up to them. I would wait for people to come and talk to me.
The big thing for Risa was that when we'd go to new places, she needed time.
My dad's the complete opposite to me. He's really encouraging me to do things, and always in a positive way, but for me sometimes it's too much. No. So that was really hard on me too, because then I felt as if I was letting them down, and I wasn't stepping up, and I wasn't putting myself out there, and I wasn't talking to everybody. So I felt like really bad on myself, and it was really hard on me.
It was a really good learning lesson for me. Risa is not like me. and that that's perfectly all right, and that that's a really good way to be. And here I had been doing all these things like, you know, talk to the man, come on, say hello, tell him your name, you know, or shake her hand, or give her a hug, or whatever. And I realized this is just like totally unfair.
So for both of us, we have to stop and think about how the other person sees things, and we have to work together, talk it out, and say, I feel like this, I know how you feel, but this is how I feel. So we both have to talk, and we both have to express our sides of it for us to be able to get through things.
So some parents learn early to understand their sensitive child and adapt their parenting even if with some difficulty. Others are more threatened by the idea.
So what's up, Mrs. Wilbur?
Your son seems a little withdrawn, maybe even depressed.
He needs to learn to stand up for himself.
Maybe. It could be. Or I wondered if he was one of those kids that was born sensitive.
Sensitive? Great, that's all he needs, is to be labeled sensitive. Sounds like a girl.
There's just as many boys as there are girls that are sensitive.
Then call it something else.
Let's call it Bill. Look, I'm gonna say something now. Bill, I think you're highly sensitive yourself. Emotional, irritable at times. You're a perfectionist, always deep in thought. You want to be your own boss. I know it's what attracted me to you. And I know now that you're just worried that Hank is going to be like you. And you want him to cover it up, like you have been your entire life.
Differential susceptibility causes some children to be more affected than others by their environment, both positively and negatively. And the same differential susceptibility occurs in the work environment. Some work environments bring out the best in sensitive people, some definitely don't. This can cause some organizations to lose their best employees, and society fail to make use of one of its greatest strengths.
I sort of say that workplaces are like families. There are good ones and not very good ones. And sensitive people are bothered more by abusive supervisors or just negative supervisors or negative coworkers. And so they end up needing to quit, and they have to quit.
Of course, the one problem for the highly sensitive is being easily overstimulated, especially at work. One study found that supervisors were most pleased with their highly sensitive workers.
Yep, I'll be there.
But these workers themselves had the lowest well-being.
When there are negative events that are occurring, highly sensitive persons tend to react in a very overstimulated fashion because we absorb that negativity much more deeply than a non-highly sensitive person.
Since some corporate cultures or individual managers may not yet have realized the importance of supporting their sensitive employees' needs, these employees themselves must do what they can to prevent burnout, which often requires standing up for themselves because they usually are highly valued. And generally, they need to be careful about taking good care of themselves.
If we don't practice really a rigorous, almost religious form of self-care, we really set ourselves up for a number of health issues, number of behavioral issues, a number of emotional issues that can affect our entire lives, our entire sense of well-being.
The world gets more high-paced. It seems like they can't keep up, but they actually can keep up as long as they get the few things they need in the workplace, which is a little bit of peace and quiet and a little bit of positive reinforcement, because sensitive people by nature pick up on criticism so that they can revise their behavior and do better. But if all they get is criticism, pretty soon they just feel beaten down. What I've noticed about sensitive people is that they do switch jobs, sometimes whole careers. Very often they decide to be self-employed.
For the beginning of my career, I always worked for other people. I was in an office, and I couldn't stand to be in an office. I couldn't stand the lighting. I couldn't stand being cooped up. I couldn't stand so many people. And eventually, I realized I really need to find something that I can do at home. And my husband and I were going back and forth saying, you know, how can we do something together as a couple and do something that will help change the world? Which was a big thought, but we really took it to task, and De Leon was born of that.
I so much enjoyed meeting John Hughes. He is such a perfect example of a sensitive man triumphing over adverse conditions. In his case, a dominating father who squelched all emotion in himself and his son. John has spent years finding his true self, but along the way, he became a leader in the business world.
After a few years, not even a few years, probably 20-some years of my career, changing jobs every 2 to 3 years, what I finally realized is that channeling that sensitivity and that drive to kind of craft my own career, that's really what I was after. I get to make a huge impact in a short period of time. I'm not locked into one company, one management or leadership style within a company, and I can, pick and choose my clients. And there's a freedom. There's a huge risk in being out on my own, but at the same time, there's a huge freedom as well. And the freedom is what I just absolutely love. And so I guess what I've really done is take my drive and my desires and my sensitivities, and I've been able to craft a career that fits me to a T.
John Hughes has been such a successful CIO that he is now in demand as an interim CIO while helping companies find the right one, as well as coaching CIOs. He recently published a highly praised book on leadership, Haunting the CEO. In an article on why HSPs made good leaders, he says they miss nothing while falling back to let team members shine, and they have almost an innate ability to say and do the right thing at just the right time. His observations about highly sensitive leaders in the corporate environment are similar to those of Dr. Maike Andreasen, a professor in the renowned business school at Bamberg University in Germany, and highly sensitive herself.
Ein anderes Thema ist, was ich schon sagte, diese sehr typische Entwicklung im Gehalt, die mit dem Alter zunimmt. I did some research about highly sensitive person regarding their motivation to become a leader. And I wanted to know whether a highly sensitive person would deselect themselves from this role. And what I found out so far is that this is not the case, which is good. So it's not that they fear or are afraid to become a leader. And I think there are some strengths that highly sensitive leaders have. And now the question is how they can get into these positions.
Also das Team hier funktioniert eigentlich relativ gut. Manchmal ist es so, dass
Dr. Andreasen helps corporations notice and use the strength of highly sensitive persons to create an environment that benefits both. Such an environment has been created by the CEO, Rupert Meyer, of the leading orchid growing company, a family-owned business in Germany.
When I worked together with Rupert Meyer, I was astonished to see how sensitive he is and how well he perceives his employees. He has a very detailed view about their personality, and I was amazed. I never saw that among managers. So he's really sensitive himself. So he, whenever there are problems, he's very good at detecting these problems and finding the reasons, and then also in finding good solutions in order to solve these challenges they have.
Ich denke, das ist heute schon sehr
In order to survive as a manager on a long-term basis, I think it is very important these days to have a technical competence, a social competence, and sensitivity towards colleagues who are considered to be highly sensitive. And that's a part of social competence.
Gehört mit zur sozialen Kompetenz.
When we communicate this concept of high sensitivity, I think there's one danger. And the danger is that people think that we want to do something for a minority and that they need a special care and a special treatment, which is not the case, because it is just a trait, and some 20% have this trait and the 80% do not have this trait. And for me, it's more a question of profiting from the strength of both groups and to combine people, and so that we can profit from each other's personality traits.
Certainly, the needs of the highly sensitive require attention if they are going to stay in companies. But both research and the experience of some business people teaches us that organizations need both types. How can we all work together, parenting, in organizations, or in marriage? First, the highly sensitive must value themselves so that they can balance the other 80% and do their part, their own particular part.
So what I want to know is what you teach HSPs about being empowered. What do they need to know?
Oh, great. That's such a great question. You know, it's come to me over the years, sort of this metaphor of here we are in San Francisco and California, and it's Highway 101. I call it Highway 101. It's like the dominant culture. There's 6 lanes, everybody's going fast, everybody's got a destination to get to, they're trying to prove themselves. And so that doesn't work for we HSPs. So I teach them that somewhere along this journey, there's an exit. And it's our own unique exit. Like mine is Jacqueline 103.25, yours is Elaine Aron. You know, we've each got our own exit. And it's it's a spiritual journey.
I like the idea of it being a spiritual journey, because understanding sensitivity takes all of us deeper into our actual true self, whatever that is. But we have also seen that this is a scientific journey and a journey for human culture.
Now, the beautiful thing about high sensitivity is that there are a great deal of scientific studies that support the construct and how it relates to other aspects of psychology. And this is really wonderful, because if people become engaged in it and they allow the ideas to enter their lives, then they'll be doing something really important for themselves, because they'll be getting scientific evidence that has value.
We now know that during these early critical periods of great susceptibility to environmental influence, that children are enormously affected and set on developmental trajectories by their early experiences. And the kinds of support and care, predictability, routines, all of the things that we think of as giving coherence to life, the more children experience that, the better families become, the better communities become, and I think in the long run, the better societies become.
I always listen to my daughter, always. Everything she felt, everything she had to say was important to me. I would always get down to her, I would always look her in the eyes, and I would always listen.
This is like probably the happiest time in my life, because I really have a good understanding of who I am, and I kind of feel like my sensitivity, I view it more as a superpower than, you know, something that is a defect about me, because it makes me able to connect to people.
So I found that knowing that other people were like this, it removed a lot of stress from me, because then I was not constantly thinking that, oh, I'm not right, this isn't how I'm supposed to be. It made me realize that it's okay for me to be like this, and people are like how I am as well.
As I got older, it's easier to accept myself for the sensitivities that I have, because I know at the same time those sensitivities have really kind of carved some things in me that I just think are just absolutely awesome. And the one I think of, if I were to point to just one, it's the leadership aspect.
Oftentimes, it's the sensitive people in our culture who are the pioneers, who are the oracles who see into the future and see what's coming in our culture. and we don't give them enough credit as guides to us, but instead demean them because they're different than we are.
What I would ask for from the non-HSP world would be mercy. Mercy and respect, for the love of God. Just respect for how much we as a trait, as a community of sensitives, how much we contribute.
Sensitivity clearly benefits the 20% and the 80% alike. But there's also the actuality of differential susceptibility, which means the sensitive gain more from a good environment and are most affected by a poor one. Right now they are most noticed by the other 80% when they are being overly sensitive. Those with happier histories adapt and make their valued contributions, and only those close to them know they are different and that they grew up feeling a little flawed. Whatever their backgrounds, however, the highly sensitive see the subtle signs of what's coming and think about it deeply, more than others do. Our world is going through vast changes, some of them frightening, and many of them not clearly understood. We all need these sensitive minds and hearts, people like those you have met here, to study and reflect on our world as it is now. We really need them. And to the highly sensitive, I say, I beg you, speak out. You now know you are in good company. We can support each other. You are not the only one.